Okay, so what we're now going to do is talk about choosing a grid system, and going to look at the difference between grid systems and CSS frameworks or front end frameworks. So let's take a look at grid systems first, because there's a likely chance that you don't understand what they are at all, and I don't blame you. It does sound like an odd thing. Now, if you take the web back to looking at it in terms of, let me just get rid of that, it's distracting. If you take the web back in terms of print design, when you look at a newspaper or an article in a magazine, you see that it's laid out nicely into columns. You'll have rows of things sometimes, then columns within them rows, and everything's laid out very neatly and very nicely, and the text flows really, really well. Now, the problem with doing web design is that when we float things like we've just looked at in the previous video, we're actually using very hacky methods to put together a layout, and it's very unreliable. Now, until we have things like Flexbox in CSS and other ways within CSS that we can actually lay out grids nicely using CSS, then we have to rely on things called grid systems, which are essentially exactly what we've looked at now, floating things, clearing things. But the difference is that they have been usually, obviously, they're open source, so people can contribute to them, and they've been made to be a lot more robust than probably what you could build, even what experienced web developers could build. So the power of the community has come together and has built things like these that allow you to quickly, first of all, mock up a website if you're just mocking something up. So if you have very little knowledge of CSS, you can just mock things up very quickly using grid systems and front-end frameworks. And we can, in actual production, use a reliable, responsive grid system. So there are grid systems like the 960 grid system, which is pretty popular. Personally, I don't like it, but you can read about it here. So this basically, the general idea is you download the CSS that's been written and you just use it. So it's fairly easy to get started with. There's other things like responsive grid system here. So here you have any number of columns, scales to any width, breakpoints, which is with responsive design. We'll look at them when we look at foundation, etc., etc. And it gives you examples of the markup. So you should exactly understand what this is, and then the CSS. But things like this, I personally think are a little bit complicated. I think Foundations works really well. Now we're coming on to what a CSS framework is. Now, a framework, don't let that confuse you. All it is it's a pre-built set of styles where you can have sort of common components on websites. So, for example, let's head over to the components part of Bootstrap, and this is a very popular CSS framework built by Twitter. So, for example, navigation. These look like little tabs, which look really nice. Bootstrap has built these for you. All you need to do is use this markup, include Bootstrap's CSS file, and then you'll have something that looks like this. And then you can go in, and within your theme, you can modify them as you need. So you can change the color, the size, the positioning, things like that. So that's basically what a framework is. Let's take a look at some other things as well. So pagination, for example, there we go. We've got a really nice looking thing like that. We've got some alerts here. So we could build these ourselves, but they're already done here, and the markup's already done for us. So you might think, oh, this is lazy. But the benefit of building things on a common framework is that, one, other people know how to use them. So if you do bring anyone else onto your project, or you're building something for a business and then you're employing people and they know Bootstrap or they know Foundation, people are going to know how to work with these. The other benefit is the fact that the markup and the styles have been, again, scrutinized by the community, added to by the community, discussed by the community, and therefore gradual improvement by lots of people means that these are a lot more stable than perhaps what you would be able to build on your own. But we're going to be using Foundation, which is also a CSS framework, but we're going to specifically in this video focus on the grid, or the next video we're specifically going to focus on the grid. So let's go ahead and look at the docs for Foundation, and let's look at the grid first of all. So when I choose a grid, I want to choose something that's really easy to use. So you can see here that we have a mobile first approach. That basically means that you look at your content from a mobile point of view first. You don't really have to do this, to be honest. It's not entirely necessary. It's just a sort of way of working that a lot of people find beneficial because, for example, if you look at content on a website, a lot of people consume content on a mobile phone now. So you have to look at the content on the mobile phone and what's important there first before you then go on to look at how it should look on a larger screen. If you start with lots of stuff on a larger screen and then you move that down to a smaller device, you may want to remove certain content, but then you think, well, why was the information there in the first place? So, for example, if you had a website for your shop that existed in a physical location somewhere and you wanted to say where we are located, on a smaller device, you probably want that to be one of the first things that a user can access. They might be out in their car, they might be out on a bus or a train and trying to get to you, and they might be trying to look up your address. So taking the mobile first approach really is to do with content rather than anything else, anything technical. Anyway, so we've got rows here, which we discussed earlier. We've got rows and we've got columns. And Foundation by default is a 12-column grid. And what that means is, if we just head over to our website, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 columns. Because 12 is a nice round number, we can fit things like 4, 8, 12 for 3 columns, which you can see here, 4, 8, 12. And this will essentially be the same as creating 3 div elements, setting them to 33 point whatever and adding a little bit of padding, and then floating them next to each other. But the benefit here is that if we were to look at creating 3 div elements, so for example, if I was to create an element here called row, and then inside of this I was to have a div called, column, column, and duplicate this down, what width, if I wanted to float all of these and have them next to each other, would I give to these? I can't give them 33.3 because you're still going to have a little bit of gap left over. Now, the problem of that is solved by frameworks like Foundation. They will work all this out for you in the back end. All the math, the really difficult math to work this out, is already been done for you. So this is how this looks. So you can see here that we've got the first row here with 4, 4, 4, and on a smaller device we've got 2, 4, and 6. This is just when your browser gets to the point where it's small enough for these to break down. So we can look at this just now. So let's go through each one of these rows and look at how this works. So we've got a row with 4, 4, 4. So these are equal, 1, 2, 3. These are equal width, great. Now on a smaller viewport, this first column is 2. So 2 out of the 12, this is 4 out of the 12, and this is 6 out of the 12. So 6 is half, so the last element will be exactly half the width of its parent container, and then 4 and 2 add up to 6, so it's a total of 12. So as we pull this in, you see that we've got 2 there. 6 here is exactly half of the width of the parent container. 4 is slightly larger than or double 2, and 2 is on the end there. So as long as each of your columns adds up to 12, it works. So it's the same for each of these rows as well. So hopefully that makes sense. But what we're going to do is in the next video, we're going to take Foundation, we're going to download its basic components, including its typography. So we'll start to see the benefit of a CSS framework. And then we will start to play around creating a very basic layout like we did before. We're going to make it a little bit more complicated though, just to show how powerful this is. And we'll build that up from scratch and you'll see how easy it is.